welcome back to my garden. Today I'm going to continue along the line of exploration that I've been following the last few weeks. Well, more than a few weeks, probably a couple of months, but there we are. I'm looking at trying to answer, or at least unpick, what I believe is a vital question, which is, why are we not doing the things that we like to do, or at least not doing them more? And consequently, why are we spending so much time doing stuff that deep down we don't enjoy doing? And worse still, we know are not particularly good for us. Where does this self-destructive behavior come from? What can we do about it? And last week I was considering the question of, I suppose, in a word, consumerism, and essentially the fact that we have become programmed to behave in a certain way to meet sort of socio-economic objectives of grander forces at play in the world at large. Anyway, I was thinking about this and kind of imagining where I was going to go next. And I remembered a very interesting phase of my life. And inevitably this is going to lead to a story, so here goes. Just after I'd moved from South Africa to England, I was 23. And the move, as I've often said before, it's worth stating, was as much to do with, I suppose, avoiding military service as it was identifying or connecting with my perceived Britishness, or pursuing opportunities that were available in England, in London, that weren't available in my sleepy hometown of Port Elizabeth. I mean, who knows how my life would have played out if there wasn't this forced spectre of conscription hanging over me. Perhaps I would have simply gone and studied mathematics from a teaching perspective and become a school teacher in South Africa, and that would have been that. But anyway, things turned out as they did, and I found myself in London. And I found myself in London with what seemed to me a nice war chest to get myself established as I worked out how I might lead my life from there on forwards. But of course, the money, which had taken a year and a half to accumulate, doing 2 jobs in South Africa, was gone in a matter of months. And I started looking for a job. And, well, if you followed my adventures on this channel, you'll know that eventually I did fall back into school teaching and somehow found myself years later here in Brazil. But this was before any of that had happened, and I thought, well, maybe I can find another job, because I had already been teaching in England, in South Africa, before moving to England. And I tried a couple of things, but frankly they weren't very suitable, they weren't good ideas. And I quickly realised that they were, on some level or another, scams. And one of them I thought about in the context of this ongoing video series. I was responded to an advertisement, sort of cryptic, but that promised great potential, great riches, and that sort of grabbed my attention. And it essentially involved selling fragrance. Observe la essence. Oh, I can't do French accents. But that was it. That was the name of it. And the company's sort of shtick that they presented to us was they'd essentially stolen the formulas of all the great perfumes, copied them, not stolen, they'd copied them, they'd worked them out, and they'd left out some trivial or minor detail that enabled the fragrance to essentially be the same, but no longer breaking any sort of property rights. So off I went to try and sell this perfume. Crazy, I know. I mean, it certainly wasn't why I'd moved from South Africa to England, fleeing teaching mathematics in respectable high schools to become a door-to-door peddler of perfumes. That wasn't the plan, but that's what was happening. And my first day out, a lovely young lady was there, sort of overseeing my work, took me under her wing as we went off into London's East End to go door to door to businesses selling these bottles of perfume. And my first sort of hour or two wasn't successful at all, so we met up for a short break in a local cafe, and I've got to say, I can't picture her, but I remember vaguely that she was, certain to my mind at the time, maybe this is how this story is morphed, but I suspect there's a lot of truth to it. I remember her being extraordinarily beautiful in a sort of glamorous blonde movie star sort of way. Great figure, bubbly personality, engaging smile, and this enormous mane of blonde hair, which she was wearing sort of tied up, professionally so, for her job. So she sat me down and I said how I was having these difficulties, and said, look, what you need to work on is your confidence, and sometimes it just requires a little trick. You need to fool yourself into being more confident. And she explained her gambit, her confidence boosting ploy. And she pulled out of her hair the sort of scrunchie, the little elastic tie that was keeping it all bundled together, and showed it to me. And it wasn't one of those hair scrunchies or whatever you call them, I'm not sure. As you can see, I don't have much call for them in these parts up north. No, it wasn't a fashion item for tying back your hair. It was a pair of lacy black knickers. Her lacy black knickers. Very sexy. I mean, how she thought this was going to help me maintain sort of measured equilibrium in the afternoon, I don't know. But she said, look, I walk out there with my knickers in my hair, just imagining what I know and the customers don't, and it just kind of makes me laugh and makes it much easier to sell the perfume. So I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? Put my sort of dodgy Y-front in my short, balding, no. There was no way I could possibly use that information in a sort of constructive manner. It didn't help. I did sell a few bottles after that. I suppose the idea was to get me to relax a little bit. But we sold a few bottles. We ended up back at head office, and the next day I went out for my second and last day of attempting to become a successful vendor of knockoff goods in the East End of London. But before we went out, her boss, and she'd had great sales that day, but her boss was extraordinarily successful. He was sort of at the top of the pyramid, and this was a pyramid scheme. There's no denying it. She wanted me to sell more perfume because she got a kickback, and the better she did in getting me to sell more perfume, there was a kickback feeding into her boss, and that's why we were doing those meetings. Besides boosting overall company sales, I mean, people had an incentive at every level. That's how pyramid schemes work, sort of. But her boss did a sort of a... he acted out a little scenario. We had to sort of invent a particular kind of customer, and then he would do a pitch, and it would show us how it was done. And it was extraordinary, actually. And afterwards, he sort of deconstructed it for us. He'd hit on, I can't remember if it was 5. He said, I think it was 5 main motivations that drive people to make impulse buys, scientifically proven. One of them was unquestionably fear of missing out. Another one was keeping up with the Joneses. And there were 3 more. A bargain, I guess. I can't remember. I suppose I didn't. It's not surprising. Decades later, I probably couldn't remember when I went out, and I proved to be a very poor door-to-door salesman. The point was that he managed to hit these 5 sort of cues for an impulse buy in basically 30 seconds. Natural sort of patter, funny, engaging. I mean, it was brilliant. And that's what we're up against. Well, that's what we were up against traditionally. People were trying to sell us cake when we didn't fancy cake. Or they were trying to sell us a sort of stale loaf of bread and convince us it was cake. And that's how sort of marketing worked. Of course, now it's operating on a more, well, sinister level. Because they're not trying to sell us cake. They're trying to addict us to crack. You know, we've gone from cake to crack. And what I mean by that is that whereas before, you know, in that sort of door-to-door scenario, I would be, meeting up with a prospect and trying to engage them quickly, take a couple of minutes out of their busy day and convince them to part with their hard-earned cash to buy some fake Poison by Elizabeth Taylor. Well, it wasn't by Elizabeth Taylor. It probably was poison. Anyway, that's what I was trying to do. Now what people are trying to do is not just get you to buy the perfume, but make you come back and do it on cue time and time and time again. They're trying to make you an addict. And so that is what we're up against. Well, I thought I'd tell the story as a little lead-in, and I've looked at the clock, and I think I've rambled on more than usual. So this is going to become a 2-parter. But I do know where I was heading with all of this, and it's that seems to be a terrible and, dare I say it, a somewhat immoral state of affairs that modern late-era capitalism has placed us in. But I think it sort of disguises a darker truth. That on some level, we are outsourcing the blame and not necessarily willing to take on board, to accept, take on board the role played by people much nearer and dearer to us. You know, in my case, I think part of the problem of all of this whole process was I was out there trying to make money. I mean, I was trying to find my way forward, but I wanted to make my fortune, you know, in London, where the streets were paved with gold. And where did that come from? It would be easy to blame it on, a dark, dastardly capitalist plot. But I think I got it, not just from those who shaped my contemporary culture that I grew up in South Africa in the 70s and 80s, but it came from my parents. And I don't mean by that my parents were dreadful, grubby materialists. Far from it. But it did come from them nonetheless. And I guess, given that it's now already 15 minutes, that's something I'll have to look into next week. Otherwise, sorry, that's the midge just flew in my eye. Otherwise, hope, given the lengthy nature of that rambling anecdote, you're still with me. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and stay with me next week when I think this will be a little bit more analytical. Well, I hope so anyway. Well, that's it. Until next week, from a sunny Brazil, ciao.